It is February 8th, our evening meeting, 6:30. And we're going to do some chapter business. If anyone wants to discuss anything in the market or anything radio related, we can do that. And then we'll go to our presentation, which should be pretty good and looking forward to. I know you did stuff with SBE and a webinar, and hopefully get some good questions tonight. So for SBE 47, we had our board meeting last night, where we do monthly just on Zoom. Doug's working on a March presentation. We talked about returning to, I know we've talked about this a few times now, but returning to, in-person meetings. The first approach was, possibly going to transmitter sites or a tour, something like that. After some discussion, we decided that, we still should probably hold off till we get some better direction, maybe from, just some better direction with kind of how things are going to stick for a while before we start doing in-person stuff again. It's kind of for everyone's safety. So that's the latest on that. We're going to be doing another video for our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do that now. And it's going to be based kind of focused on the CRO, which is the SBE Certified Radio Operator exam. Jason on our board teaches at Valley College, and helped identify that there's some areas he could help. He needs help teaching the students, and videos could be helpful. So myself, Jason, Marcos, and Doug are probably going to go to KFI on the 20th, and we're going to film some of that. So look for that. Should be a good one. Yeah, looking forward to that. That's pretty much what I have. I don't have the all the bank stuff, but we're going to get that shortly. As far as other news, the chapter chair newsletter came out. So renew your SBE membership time goes till April. I think it's April. Yeah, April 1st is the deadline. So get that done before if you don't want your membership to lapse. $85 for traditional, $175 for Member Plus. If you watch one or two webinars, it pays for itself. They got a lot of good stuff on there. So consider Member Plus. Becoming SBE certified. June is the next day. Doug is our certification chair. So if you have any questions, reach out to me or reach out to him. And more webinars coming up. They got one for lighting consideration, February 17th, and introduction to successful troubleshooting, February 24th. One other thing that came across, X-Ray sent this email to Marcos, basically to inform everybody on the chapter that George Chambers has unfortunately passed away. He was a engineer with KTNQ, KLove, KPP or KPPC, and KABC as well. So unfortunately, it looks like passed away from just a fall. And I did not know him personally, but we wanted to pass the information along. All right, that's all I have for SBE 47 for San Diego. Tony or Gary or anything for the group? All right, Eric, anything for chapter 9?
Not much. We're toying with the idea about going back to in-person meetings. Our previous hosting venue is still shut down, but we may be looking over at Gray Television for that. Nothing's certain at this point. Yeah.
What's your normal venue?
It was KTAR Bonneville, but change of personnel, and from the top on down to engineering there, we don't know what the future is exactly for that place. It was nice. It was separately located, but then again, so is Channel 3-5 Gray now. It used to be Meredith, but they changed hands. So.
And then what about the South Mountain build? How's that going?
So the South Mountain thing, the tower, well, that's your group, right? iHeart. So the tower is going to have an antenna on it. Vertical Bridge tells me along about March. The roof is going on the 2-story building. And I know that their talent here is looking to acquire, I think they're going to go with Gates Air Transmitters. Not sure who's making the combiner, probably ERI, since they're doing the antenna. So I would imagine it'd be sometime in the summer when it's commissioned. I was a Benton person.
Cool. Well, thanks for the update.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure.
All right. So
Oh,
we're not.
lastly,
sir.
I'm playing TV now. So, if you guys didn't know, I'm with Univision. Sorry, Televisa Univision, as the company is called. So, but yeah, we have channel 33 here and 4 Rimshot FMs. That's a lot of traveling, way too much traveling. That's it from the desert.
Yeah,
That's a long way out to those
congratulations.
Yeah, it is. I see.
Yeah, that's a full day to go from one to the other.
You can't but do maybe one in a day. And then if you take the snowcat and go up to Mormon Mountain near Flagstaff, it becomes a 15-hour day. I'm not kidding.
Yes.
It's arduous, but fun, sort of.
I had the joy in March.
Tough time.
Let's see. The only other thing I had is that I believe Univision in LA is looking for an assistant director of technology. I don't have a link. I asked for a link on their website, but I don't have anything for that. So look for that if you're interested. Univision LA looks like they're hiring. So anything else that anyone wants to discuss in the market? Nothing really I have at the moment. Anyone else? Okay. Well, without any further ado, I'll introduce Stephen Lockwood. You did your presentation for the SBE webinar, but on new RFR rules. So let's learn all about it. Stephen, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here. Let me share my screen here and we'll jump into the previously abused PowerPoint here, if I know how to do this. It says host has spotted. All right. Select window. All right, I'm clearly not competent to do this. It doesn't give me my choice. Let me make sure I have that up. Yeah, it's up and running on. All right, let me try that again. Yeah, I don't see my PowerPoint available on the share. And I tested this earlier. Is there some magic that I'm not understanding? Portion.
Should have full access to be sharing your screen.
Okay, let me all right, share screen, portion of screen, PowerPoint as virtual background at basic whiteboard iPhone pad, and then files, it has other things. So it doesn't allow me, usually it throws up a little menu that has my screens available. Maybe I can send my PowerPoint to someone else or something, or heavens. Let me see.
Are you in the, so when you open up share screen, there's basic and advanced?
Yeah, I've looked in all three. So portions of a screen or PowerPoint as advanced has portion of a screen, but it doesn't show. Oh, there we go. That's no, well, I don't want just portions of a screen. I want the whole screen. Can you see the PowerPoint now? Maybe, or just a zoom.
Very big. See a portion of it.
Yeah, all right. It says a portion of it. I'm enlarging a window so you can see more than just a portion of it. Well, or a larger portion of it. And there we go. All right. Let's see. All right. Well, that will be sufficient. This is just a quick review of the recent rules that became effective last May. And there were some follow-on rules of what the FCC is looking at for the radio frequency exposure rules. The FCC is essentially effectively reviewing those rules pretty much all the time, and there's always some sort of process going on. And that was sort of in the original legislation that put these together. Is they're not just a stagnant set of rules. They need to be always looked at and make sure that they're including all relevant science and as we go forward. This docket had three main parts. One of them was looking at the question that was asked in 2013 of should the limits be changed, and then the second portion was report and order with some new rules for RF exposure, and then also the third part was looking at additional rules that would be coming and a proposed rulemaking of additional things that may be of interest. Looking at a lot of these, there's not a lot of stuff. Looking at the whole bulk of this rulemaking, there was a large portions of it that applied to aspects that most broadcasters don't really care about. So some of it the cellular world and all of that. But as far as just the quick takeaways for broadcasters, one of them is the first one of RF exposure. The FCC has just decided, their statement there of just basically letting it ride, and so they've reviewed all of the comments that are made. There's some perennial comments by certain entities that are always thinking that it needs to be a million times lower than it is, and then there's other perennial comments by others that think it should be relaxed. But the FCC generally looked at it and said, hey, it's doing its job, and we'll look at it. And then there's also the continued participation with the other agencies, of FDA and EPA and some of the other folks, and OSHA generally chimes in on it, although I don't recall seeing any specific comments from them. But this is part of looking at those limits. Are those limits appropriate for the current understanding of science? And so the FCC thinks that all of that right now is doing what it needs to be doing, and is appropriately protecting the public from excessive radio frequency exposure. The other section is a new set of rules that have been adopted, and these rules, I keep pushing the wrong buttons here, are looking at how to comply with the FCC rules, and how to make some of the analysis of how to figure out whether we're complying with that process. And then also there's some portions of it that have to do with some how we communicate the hazards and those kinds of things. The proposed rulemakings that they're talking about going in the future really don't have much to do with broadcast. They're one of the biggest things they were talking about is expanding. Current limits are to 100 gig, and they're talking about going to 3,000 gig, or which are generally places where we don't wiggle as broadcasters because they don't go any places. But in any case, those are some of those issues. So the evaluation process that the FCC has, continues to do, they've cleaned up some of the language there that they've had that is trying to make sure that it's consistent with other usages throughout and consistent with current usages of that. And so one of them is exemption, and then categorically excluded. Many of these kinds of things, they're kind of looking at devices that generally, we use them in broadcast, but they're extremely low powered devices that are, so clearly compliant that they're exempt from any further study and those kinds of things. So in our business, those are things like wireless microphones and Wi-Fi cell phones and those kinds of things, where the manufacturer is taking care of that issue of compliance and sells those devices. And so those things are just exempt from it. And then evaluation, and is something where all devices require some sort of evaluation. So if you're a manufacturer, you have to evaluate your devices for radio frequency exposure. But for broadcasters, pretty much all of our facilities need some sort of evaluation that look at that facility and where it is on the planet, and comparing all of the other facilities around it. And we need to stop and do some math and some analysis, some measurements, and to determine whether it's compliant. And we're still using all of the methods that are laid out in OET 65, and same math. And the FCC still is for FM stations, the FM model, and a few of those things. FCC is currently reissuing OET 65, and we've got some updates with it, and kind of dumping some of the portions of it that we don't think many people use and aren't particularly useful, and simplifying some of the other aspects. But it's still the same physics as far as analyzing whether exposure is going to be an issue or not. So those are the same sort of things. But the big thing for broadcasters really is mitigation, and this is situations where we are creating environments that exceed either the public exposure limits or the occupational exposure limits. And the main issue here is signage, and how we deal with that and make sure we communicate that information. And then if there are situations where we need to have access control or training or other methods to make sure that the general public or occupational people are not exposed to fields that exceed their particular situation. And so those are some things that need to be talked about. Historically, the FCC didn't have any signage standards, and if you looked at the rules, I always teasingly said you could write danger RF on the back of a piece of plywood with a spray can, and it'd meet the FCC rules. Most folks have sort of ended up using the signs that are approved by the IEEE in their standards committees. And so basically the FCC has adopted those set of signs, and we need to move as our broadcasters to those signs to do that. Those standards that the IEEE use, I think there's a couple of their standards. The C95 .2 2018 has got the standards for radio frequency and current flow symbols, and those are for just kind of making sure that we're using the same type of language and same type of discussions as we do to do those. And so the FCC has essentially adopted those standards, so that we have to have some consistency in those signs that and those have generally been considered the best practices in the industry, and so the FCC is kind of playing along with that. There's category 1, and there's 4 categories of signs, and these are laid out in the rules. And category 1 is for areas that are below the general population limit. There's no requirement for signs if you meet the exposure. If you've got a transmitter site and there's no areas at ground level that exceed the public exposure standard, you don't have to have a sign. If you want to put anything up there, you can put sort of an information sign. This is one off of Rick Tell's site that he makes for AT&T, but you can make an information sign, and you want to use green is what the optional sign is, green. And so you can talk about who owns the site, what is happening here, what kind of behavior you expect there, and how to contact folks for this sign. And so that's a pretty useful thing. you see this sign around a lot of cell companies. The next category of sign is for where you're above the general population limit but below the occupation limit, and that's this blue sign. And that's one that so if there's a situation where the general population limit is exceeded, you need to have some access control that doesn't allow the general population in that area. And this is done by fences or other processes to keep the general public out of those areas. Category 3 is the yellow sign, which is where you're above the occupational limit and but below the 10 times the occupation limit. And so this is the sign that you're going to have if you're in situations that are above the occupation limit. This has been the go-to sign for broadcasters, and we've put this everywhere. And so there's some reviews that we need to go through and make sure that it's actually in a situation that it's actually warning of a real hazard. Because this sign has been put up kind of willy-nilly at many transmitter sites, just because it was, I think the scary part of it is part of one of the things that we need to do. And then this is the warning sign that if you're above 10 times the occupational standard, you need to have this sign up. And then there's an additional sign that if there is a danger, a real serious immediate danger where someone can be injured, and the great example of this is antenna bases around AM towers. Although in my experience, people don't generally touch them a second time. They cause radio frequency burns, and radio frequency burns smell bad and make you stand up and hit your head on something sharp and say rude sailor birds. And most situations they're not going to cause any electrocution, but they will burn you and make you very, very angry. And so this is a situation where a danger sign is an appropriate thing to have around tower bases. So additional mitigation things that you can use in these areas. Of course, for category 2, you're going to have signs, and then you have to have positive access control, locked doors, locked ladder cages and fences, and or on building security. So if you have a transmitter building or transmitter site on top of a tall building, the access to the roof can be limited with building security. And then you also have to have appropriate training and supervising of all transient persons. So if it's a situation of a rooftop, and this is big in the cellular industry. So if you've got a rooftop where there's situations where you're actually using several kilowatts of RF up there, and this is becoming increasingly the case in LTE and 5G, that you can be in situations where you want to limit access on the roof, and then make sure that anybody that goes on that roof is trained and understands that the antennas are pointed this way. And and this includes elevator maintenance people, HVAC people, and other people that are going to find roofers and other people that are going to find themselves on the roof. So category 3, the caution signs where we're above the occupational standards. Once again, we can have the signs, engineering control indicators, such as and access limiting places like chains or railings, maps, printed material that you give people there, and then once again appropriate training. One of the engineering controls that John Lyons did at 4 Times Square. There's one particular aux antenna that when it was operating, the exposure level on the roof was above the occupational standard. So basically, he had a engineering control that would not let you have access to the roof and there was, a series of lights and exposure issues that would not let you out on the roof while that antenna was operating. And so that was, an engineering control. And then if someone was on the roof, that it would also have a interlock that would not allow that facility to come on until that person was off the roof. So there's some things like that. We see these kinds of things internationally. If you want to access antenna systems internationally and big megawatt medium wave facilities, there's a key a system that will, in order to release the keys that will allow you into the antenna tuning units or other restricted areas, you have to have the key that has the interlock for the transmitter, and you can put that in, and then that will release the keys to these access areas. And then if you want the key to turn the transmitter back on, you have to have all the other keys back in their positions and all those doors locked. So there's some clever things that you can do with those kinds of situations that would give you engineering controls and access control that would keep folks from being in potentially dangerous situations. Category 4, once again, that's a situation where you can have the same sort of situations where you have a power reduction or cease operating. One of the things that we have not used a lot in the broadcast industry, but is pretty much the standard in the rest of industry, is lockout, tagout. Kinds of things where, if you want to have access to this area, you can put a lock on another thing that will not allow it to operate. You could put a lock on a transmitter that would not allow it to operate. And that's probably a situation that we probably, I think that we need to, certainly with multi-user sites where there's situations where things may be turned on remotely. Those are some considerations that might be a reasonable approach to take in those multi-user sites. And the additional things about communications here is the FCC has adopted the IEEE, the RF Energy Advisory symbol here. So, which is either an angel or something, but anyway, this is the RF advisory symbol. And so on all of your communication signs, you need to have this symbol as well. And you need a description of the RF source, what that source is, antenna, or that you have what type of antenna that would be. And then we want to also communicate what we want people to do to avoid being exposed. So, don't go on the roof, turn off this facility, whatever that action is. Don't climb this ladder when this facility is on. Don't climb this tower when this facility is on. And then we also need up-to-date contact information to make sure that if someone shows up and needs access for whatever reason of this may be, whether it's emergency workers or other situations, we need to have some way that somebody walking up to this facility can have access to the people that control this facility, and so that's important. The FCC also recycled this graphic out of the IEEE standard, and so which is kind of helpful to let you know where you fit in this situation. So some evaluation of what your site is and where it fits in these categories is needed. We have until next, or a year from May, to comply with these changing our signs and warning these kinds of situations. And then we're in a potential breach of compliance. And if Lark ever leaves his office, he'll come and write you a ticket on these things. I mentioned the revisions to OET 65, and we also of have the use of FM model, which is a fine tool. The FM model, of course, like all of the calculation tools we use, tend to over predict. So if you meet things with with the calculations, you're going to be in good shape. But if you're in a situation where the calculations show you right on the edge, then that may be a situation where measurements are appropriate. Or if the site is so complicated that making any model of it for RF exposure is so difficult, and we have a few of those around here, that measurements are probably a more expedient method to determine whether there's compliance issues. So all new facilities must comply with the new rules, and existing facilities have until 3 May 23 to comply. And so review of the evaluation and process and mitigation must be done for all of your facilities, and make sure that your signage is and your methods are in compliance. This is not as hard of a situation for most broadcasters, because when you go through license renewal, you're supposed to be doing this kind of effort. And most of you, can look back at the applications that were filed by your consulting engineer, and there's a portion in there where they talk about RF exposure, and so those areas there need to be reviewed and looked at to make sure that you're in great situations. One of the other things that kind of comes to mind at this situation, and I know that many of these sites have legacy signs. Most of them have been up since we first started thinking about RF exposure in the 70s and 80s. And so we've got signs that are inappropriate, and so often you'll see folks that have the ionizing radiation sign, which is inappropriate. Any sign you see with that on it needs to be taken out and used as target practice. And then we also have this situation here where we have possible RF hazard, radiation hazard for pregnant women and persons wearing pacemakers. Having talked with a number of people over the years who've worn pacemakers and done a little research on this, it seems that if you're below the public exposure standard, that's the pacemakers are not a problem. But once again, Stephen Lockwood's not a medical professional, and you should discuss this with your medical professionals. And when I've tried to do research on this with pacemakers, I often get a little pushback if I call the pacemaker manufacturers. They see that I'm a consulting engineer, and they think I'm working for some gravy sucking attorney who's fixing to sue them, and they're kind of hold their cards pretty close to their vest and don't share that information readily. But in any case, and then if you also look at the research, you don't see all of the discussions of radio frequency exposure and pregnancy don't show any problems there. So this is a sign that's not founded in a reasonable reading of the analysis. It's a sign that's founded in fear mongering, and then the other sign to the bottom right there is the old OSHA sign, which oddly enough are still in the OSHA rules, but the OSHA rules have completely been made redundant by the FCC rules, and this is a place where the FCC has the lead on it, and the OSHA takes the FCC's lead on that. So the other thing is on tower work. I am a big proponent of, if you're working on the towers, turn off the facility. My take on that is the field that we're mostly concerned about when we're working on towers is the gravity field, and it doesn't have an off switch. And the gravity field is what we look at all of our problems that we've had in this industry with fatalities, and the gravity field claims a few people every year. And so turn that off. Don't make things difficult to climb on that tower. I think many of the broadcasters in the larger markets now have complete backup facilities. So if somebody's working on the tower, turn it off. Figure out how how to make it happen and do that. But you know, I understand there's situations where other choices need to be made, but I am a big proponent of just, you know, making sure that the people can work safely and quickly. I don't particularly like RF suits because you know, it's either hot and those things are hot and you limit visibility, and then the other side of it is if it's winter, you've got another layer on and it's difficult to move around and all that stuff, and that just makes things more cumbersome and troublesome. But that's you know, certainly my opinions on that. The other issues is we want to make sure that the signs are correct, and I think we've all experienced places that have just been oversigned, and you look at, they got all of these signs there, and you know, some of the cell companies are particularly egregious in this fact, is they'll put the whole collection of signs in the hopes that one of them may be correct. And you know, so if we got them all up, you know, that'll work. And so, but there's a lot of those signs that are just flat wrong for that application. And so we don't want to oversign. We want to warn about hazards that exist. We don't use RF exposure signs for no trespassing signs. So we use no trespassing signs for no trespassing signs. RF signs that are scary to make people run away is just absolutely inappropriate. I see this a lot with high voltage signs. You'll see high voltage signs at transmitter sites, and and you realize that the high voltage at that site is the same high voltage that's available in your home, and you have to take the cover off the panel to get to it, or you have to take apart some machinery to get to a high voltage. And it's just inappropriate to put those kinds of signs up where that hazard does not exist. And then, of course, remove outdated signs and make your signs appropriate to the hazards that are there. And with that, we'll open it up for questions, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, you know, Stephen, is when it comes to like tower lighting, you know, the broadcaster shares responsibility with, you know, the tower manufacturer or tower company rather. So is there any cases where, you know, people have been fined, but you know, the broadcaster gets fined as well as the tower company? You know, who's really responsible? Like at least Mount Wilson, you know, a lot of shared sites. What's your thought on that?
Yes, for tower lighting, it's the owner that is responsible. So if the owner is not maintaining the tower lighting, it's the owner that is responsible. But you know, the FCC has always had difficulty with a hook to get to the owner, because the owner is not a licensee of the FCC. And so their way to get at the owner of the tower is through the broadcaster, and so that has always been a little troublesome. But I think most of the larger site owners have taken, you know, and thinking of Crown Castle, American Tower, Vertical Bridge, and you know, and there's dozens of others now that escape me. But most of those folks have taken tower lighting fairly seriously, and have actually taken tower lighting more seriously than the broadcasters have in the past, and you know, and have gone through and updated all their tower lighting even when they haven't had to, mostly because they want to manage it from their network operations facilities and be reasonably responsible for that. But that's, you know, that's just more landlord-tenant relations, and which in many of these cases is tense to begin with. And
So I guess the question would be, do you think it applies to signage? You know?
Yes, yeah, and I think that you know, so for multi-user sites, I think there's some the landlord, I think, ultimately is the one who bears the responsibility on making sure the signage is appropriate for that site. And so you know, and at places like Mount Wilson, this is he says politely, a remarkable challenge. So, and you know, there's other sites in town that come to mind as well that are also equally as challenging, because you have multiple group owners and multiple tower owners and all sorts of gravy sucking cell phone companies and two-way and land mobile and you know, so it's just a challenge all the way around.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think Dr. Kramer, you have your hand up. You have a question?
Thank you very much, Stephen. Spectacular presentation. And as someone who works for local governments reviewing RF evaluations, this is really great information. More than a question per se, but really the issues that we're seeing on the government side are mischaracterized reports that say that anybody who walks on a roof is occupational because that's their occupation. And, you know, as much as we'd probably laugh at that, we see those coming in all the time. The other problems we see are sites that are under characterized, where engineer will simply evaluate the proposed emissions from its own site, regardless of whether there are 4 or 5 other co-located sites up there. And I want to share this with the group because so many of you out there are PE is what we're seeing as well now. And I hate to put it so bluntly, is that we're seeing RF reports that are coming in that could not have been actually evaluated by the PE who stamped it. Could not have been.
And I wholeheartely agree with you. And you know, we compete with these guys, and it's just been a race to the bottom. And one of the and there's a large company I won't name, but they sent somebody out. I have at the time I had 3 cell sites on my church building in Bellevue, Washington, and which, you know, they're nice tenants. They write nice consistent checks. And it's also been my RF exposure laboratory for the cellular industry. And so, you know, having climbed all over the roof with my nardometer and, you know, looked at what they're doing, you know, I was profoundly aware that first of all, there were no areas anywhere on the roof, even if you could hug these antennas, because we're, you know, at that time, there were no areas that were above the public exposure standard. And this particular group came in and they sent somebody to make the measurements. And I looked at, well, anyway, he produced a report that said my site was entirely out of compliance and they wanted to get me on a program. And it was signed by a PE, and I called the guy up and asked him if he knew the guy who came to make the measurements, and he did not even know the guy. And so, you know, which begged the direct responsibility and direct supervision problem with PEs in signing reports. But it was clearly a lack of information. Then I've seen the other side of it where you know, they warn just for the carrier they're dealing with, and they have no idea who else is on the rooftop.
Right.
And so you know, the whole rooftop industry, and that's where you know, out of all of the areas that I look at for RF exposure, those rooftops are the most challenging aspects of this, and largely because the cellular folks can also come in and they'll change all their amplifiers and antennas without the landlord knowing it, and without anybody having any idea that they've added, you know, 6 more bands and you know, and kilowatts of RF. And so, yes, it's troublesome, you know. And then the question of, you know, what does it take to be occupational? And, you know, does somebody actually sit down with the HVAC guy and say, you know, this is what's happening, don't go past this line, and those kinds of things. And some of that may be acceptable, and, you know, and so how you work through that, and rooftops are just a challenge. So
It's a site-by-site issue, to be sure. The last thing I'll comment on as someone who reviews these reports hundreds of times a year is it's fairly rare so far, but with the 5G push, whatever 5G is, as we talked about earlier, with the 5G push, I suspect it's going to be a bigger issue, which is we're seeing some of the land use companies photocopying stamps from one project to another. Which, you know, it's a criminal act in most jurisdictions. And yet it seems to be, it's happening more than anyone would like to see. PE stamp mills are happening more than anyone would like to see, but these are issues which luckily have escaped broadcast because of the very different nature, but it's an issue for all of us who have co-located facilities at broadcast sites. So thank you for allowing me to step up on a soapbox, my friend.
Well, yes, I echo your concerns, and we've certainly in our experience have had people basically steal our reports and complete with signatures. And the question is, do we want to chase them down and beat them up? We had one particular group of folks in Canada, which they were Canadian registered Washington State PEs, and they did not even bother to rewrite our report. And which if I'm going to steal somebody's report, I'm going to at least reorder the paragraphs, or but it was straight out, and even the same typeface. So anyway, there's the Philistines are at the gates. So
Thank you.
All right, we got a couple hands here. Richard Rudman, you got a question?
Yes, I do. Steve, on the slides you presented and this evening and other presentations I've seen you do, there's no mention of actually going out and doing actual measurements. It's all basically done on a mathematical computational models, and I'm wondering if you'd like to comment on what the role is of actually going out with a meter and verifying measurements.
Well, I always have to step back to the physicists on this and then translate the standard adage into engineering terms. But the standard adage is nobody believes theory except the guy that did it, and everybody believes measurements except the guy that did it. And which is often the case on these kinds of things. I myself prefer measurements, and because there's a lot of things that cannot be categorized in just from the operational aspects of this. Now, whether this is appropriate in all situations, I think in broadcast facilities where that everybody on the mountaintop has got a transmitter that's capable of this, and they're operating at that antenna, and so we go make measurements. Back with our cellular stuff, the measurements for cellular stuff are signed and stamped by people like me that says, this is what I measured this day. And, and next week, the guy's coming in with a refrigerator dolly and bringing all new bits and pieces and parts, and who knows what it's going to be like. And whether the implementation guys are even talking with the land abuse guys and getting even the appropriate permits to do this in the jurisdiction they're working in. And so, there's some problems with that. So, like I said earlier, the theory that we have available to us tends to overpredict, and this is even true in the cellular world. If you have all of the bits and pieces, and I've done, pardon me, measurements on rooftops where the cellular people have said, "Henny penny, the sky is falling, you can't go anywhere near this rooftop," and you go there and there's nothing above public exposure. And so that makes the landlord nervous, and so you go and say, well, it's not that bad. And you look at how the guy did the original calculations, and you go, well, he didn't assume, he assumed that this was on the deck and it's actually 18 feet above the deck. And so, you're shooting over the head. It's very directionalized antenna, or, the antenna's closer to the parapet than his drawings had. And so there's some of those kinds of situations. So, looking at both situations, I believe that measurements are the final analysis, but measurements are in their own right difficult and are only a picture in time, and they're really good for broadcasting. For cellular people, troublesome. Now the other warning that I will talk about this with measurements, and this is a problem that we're having at all the broadcast sites, is the personal monitors that folks are bringing. The personal monitors that I've seen, there's several out there they're made offshore, and they're 3 dB cheaper than the ones that are made in Germany. And what's interesting about these particular monitors is they say you only need one monitor worldwide, because it does ICNRP, the European standard, and it does Canadian Safety Code 6, and it does FCC. So if you look at those 3 standards worldwide, there's some areas where they kind of wander off from each other. And if you draw those curves as you go across the spectrum, and you say, well, how do I get a personal monitor that meets those? Well, you quickly look at it, and they say, well, and it's got FCC plus 3 dB minus 6 dB. And so it's going to alarm when it's 6 dB below the FCC standard, and so it draws that curve underneath all of it. And so you give these monitors to the cellular people, and they show up at your broadcast site, and it alarms. The other problem with these monitors is they also do not add multiple frequencies correctly. And so if you look at how they add multiple frequencies, you end up with an error, a cumulative error that starts to stack up pretty quickly. And so they will alarm very quickly. And I've made measurements at sites where if you spatially average the field like you're required to do in the standard, that you will find that spatially averaged field is, in my example of this, was with this meter, was 40% of public exposure, and the personal monitor was reporting 200% of occupation. And so, you have to remember that the personal monitors are not measuring devices; they are alerting devices. And then you also see these folks take the personal monitor, and then they'll hold it right up against the coax and or the tower leg, and it'll alarm, and they'll say, oh, henny penny, the sky's falling. But you look at just from the basic physics of a measurement antenna, if you get it near another conductor, you will have mutual coupling between those 2 devices, and the measurements of that antenna are just way off because of that mutual coupling. And so there's some challenges there, and that's been like 2 or 3 times a year more of the consoling engineering side of our practice, where we go and pat people on the head and tell them they're there, really it's okay. And so between those 2 things, so do we want to alarm early? Well, alarming early tells you that something's on. But if you're going to say that we're 200% of the standard, we're at a multiple user site, and you're only 40% of the public exposure standard, you either need to get you need to come out and do some appropriate measurements, or you need to leave your personal monitor in the truck. So.
All right, well, these are really good questions. Steve Marina, you got your hand up?
Yeah, Stephen, thank you so much for, I think, the clarity in terms of signage, particularly, and also where appropriate to make measurements. I can say in terms of personal monitors, I've been at a site where a climber went up and came down because his monitor went off, and we discovered there was a broken flange on a FM transmission line.
Yeah.
So I think personal monitors are appropriate, but they've got to be used for the right thing. So absolutely. What I wanted to talk to you about was broadcast auxiliary, because I've been doing presentations to amateur radio clubs about how the new rules affect amateur radio operators. And essentially, the new rules say that all stations have to be routinely evaluated for compliance now, and that the categorical exclusions that used to take place that covered mobile radios, handheld radios, STLs, all that stuff, that's all gone, essentially. And so if you have an STL now, you have a requirement to have an evaluation on that STL, essentially. Or if you have a mobile radio, you have a requirement to have an evaluation of a mobile radio. And if you have handheld radios that are new, not the old ones because they're grandfathered, but a new handheld, you should have an SAR test associated with that radio. So I'm just kind of curious, where do you think we're at in terms of the auxiliary radios, basically, and how much will the FCC be looking for enforcement on these new rules with the auxiliary, broadcast auxiliary?
Yeah, I don't see that, first of all, that, I mean, quite frankly, with enforcement now, the only enforcement that is done now is complaint based. And, so I don't, the old days of an inspector showing up at your door and wanting to see everything about your facility, they're gone. We have Lark and 3 other guys here in LA. And we have Ben in Portland. We have 2 folks in Denver, and Honolulu and Anchorage have closed. Seattle's closed. These guys that are left, they're busy working with the complaints that they have, and quite frankly, they wouldn't mind more complaints from broadcasters if you know of pirates and things like that happening, or situations where you think there's potential problems. They're happy to look at those. But as far as any risk of anybody showing up and saying this is a situation, and same way with amateur radio stuff, unless somebody complains, it's not going to be, I don't think it'll be an issue, from just looking at manpower and all of those kinds of things. Now, with that said, all of our amateur radio brethren, we need to stop and look at our facilities that we have, and stop and do a little bit of math. And I think, the tools are out there to do that math, and to make sure that we're not in a situation where we're causing our loved ones or our neighbors any potential harm. But as far as STL stuff is concerned, it's one of those situations where if it's mounted where it's in a reasonable situation where it's doing you some good, it's probably high enough off the deck you don't have to worry about it. But that, even then, that's some math that you could do, and just doing a 1/r² calculation from the elements to where you are, and you can quickly do that. And the high power stuff is 14 watts. As far as microwave exposure, high power microwaves, 1.33 watts. So if you've got you can essentially take that internally, but that is not generally an issue. And if the microwave antenna is mounted in anywhere that it's going to do anybody any good, you're not going to have anybody standing directly in front of it, because you want to put it up high enough, or a situation like that. But if you've got a microwave antenna where somebody can stand in front of it, you've inappropriately installed that antenna. But if you go back to OET 65, even if it's an antenna where you can stand in front of it, if you stop and do the math in OET 65 and look at it, that you've got 1.33 watts coming out of this antenna, and you've got a 4-foot reflector in the back of it, that unless you're right by the feed horn, you really cannot, and the feed horn is, pointed back at the dish, you cannot be really in any situation where that's going to be an exposure issue. But in any case, the other, as far as handheld radios, one of the things that we have traditionally relied on with handheld radios is the duty cycle factor. And of course, some of us are long-winded and will hold the push to talk down longer than we probably should. But there's some of those kinds of situations. So some analysis of those situations would be useful. And if you got some facility that you're concerned about, call somebody in to measure it. I know that several of the folks in town here have perfectly wonderful measurement tools and would be happy to come out and wave the wand around whatever facility you have. So.
All right, Richard, did you have another question or?
Just a comment. The discussion about amateur radio is interesting. I worked with Steve Marine and Bert Weiner. We actually characterized the transmit field around Steve's automobile on a Saturday one weekend a few months ago, and learned a lot of interesting things about that. And I believe Steve wrote that up, and it's part of his presentation that he does.
Excellent. Does he have to move?
Well, in his car, yeah.
Well, what we found was the field that was measured by Richard was very close to what the calculated field was using the ARRL calculator that's available.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were very pleased, and we found that inside the car, this is with a roof mounted antenna, that inside the car, it was a pretty good Faraday shield. Now, an antenna, a 440 megahertz antenna or a 2-meter antenna mounted on the trunk probably poses a non-acceptable hazard to someone in the back seat of the car. But it would have to be measured. We didn't do that. I was just going to say, I did put a website up, ka6ugs.com. It's kilowatt alpha 6 uniform golf sierra.com. It's got an exemption calculator that you can use, and it has all the links to all the ARRL website references, which can be helpful. And a lot of them would apply to broadcast auxiliary.
I'll have to look that up. It sounds quite helpful. And it's always nice to calibrate models with measurements, and when you get close, you kind of feel like science has been done. So that's even more wonderful.
It was good. I was just not impressed with the cleaning of the sensing element. Richard cleaned it kind of with his tongue. I don't understand how that works, but.
Yeah. Oh, well. It's all those lovely hold my beer and watch this kind of moments.
Do as I say, not as I do. Hey, Steve, would you mind put that website in the chat? A few people were.
All right.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for being here. Do you also want to put your contact in the chat?
Yes. And, happy to answer any questions. And, if you want to call up and chat about various things, that's happy to do that. It's always interesting and informative to know what's going on, and if we can be of any help, happy to work out. So.
All right. Just a couple last things. Tony, I see that you're on now. Do you have anything for San Diego you want to talk about with the group?
I haven't prepared anything. So I only found out about this on the way home when I checked my email. So
all good.
That's why I was a little bit late. But I appreciate you guys putting this together. And I think, again, Gary's got a bunch of stuff on the website that he put out, the newsletter he put out today. It's a very good read as always.
Awesome. For SB 46 or 747, our next meeting will be the 8th of March. That will be a lunchtime meeting at 11:30. And the presenter still a TBD. We'll send out an email on that. So unless anyone's got anything else, we'll adjourn and meet next month. And thanks again, Steve, for being here.